everyone. Welcome to Talky Taffy, where we take a little bite of some random topic and stretch it out. I'm Emily. My co-host here is Doug.
Hello.
And so welcome. Doug, I have a question for you and for chat if you're willing to participate. So what do you think of when you think of the word talent, or when someone says, that person is so talented? Just shoot things off from the top of your head.
My association immediately is like a talent show. So kind of,
Okay.
I guess, kind of like a hobby kind of thing. Something you do in your free time when you're not working or at school or doing whatever you do during the day. It's just a hobby you pick up in the back time.
Are there certain things that come to mind as far like what that talent would be?
I think music is typically like the stereotypical thing that I imagine as a talent. It could also be like something athletic or along those lines.
Okay. So I have been thinking a lot about talents a lot, especially with quarantine and like people, especially towards the beginning of everything that's been going on with COVID. Like people were finding new hobbies and nurturing new like talents, I guess, and new skills, whether they were recreational or functional. And so this has been kind of like bringing me back to my undergrad years and what it really meant to understand what like a talent is. And when I was in my first year of undergrad, I was taking a class and I was taking vocal pedagogy. And my teacher introduced me to a book called The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle. And the subtitle is Greatness Isn't Born, It's Grown. And I find that a lot of people, especially when I mention or like talk about the fact that I'm a musician or I see other people who are musicians, something that I hear a lot is people saying, oh, you're so talented. Oh, they're so talented. I wish I had that talent. Or, you know, it's like, oh, some people are just born with like this talent. And you know, for a long time, I also kind of believed that. But then as I got older, I kind of just noticed that, like, whenever people would say that to me, I felt like, but I mean, I'm glad you're acknowledging that I'm kind of good at this thing. But by saying that I'm talented, I feel like you're kind of ignoring how much time and effort is put into developing a talent. And so this book really kind of opened my eyes and kind of bringing to my own attention cognitively what talent actually is. So this book kind of is a collection of case studies where this guy, Daniel Coyle, he's a reporter, and he kind of goes into the science about developing talent and what happens when a particular geographical area seems to produce a lot of that particular talent. So you've got like, he took, for example, like, I'm not a big sports person, but like Brazil was big about soccer for a really long time. I don't know if it still is, but like he was like, what makes it so that like Brazil is really producing these fantastic athletes? Or what is it about like the school in South Korea that has a bunch of golfers all of a sudden that are just like popping up out of nowhere and winning a ton of tournaments? Or like areas like, oh, this area seems to be producing a lot of like really, really skillful musicians. So what is it about these areas, how they're practicing, how they're being taught, that makes it so special? And he really delves into the science of learning and how humans in general acquire new skills. So basically,
if I may, I found it really interesting, kind of reading the prep for this show, how strong of a correlation there is between location alone and these amplified levels of talent. It's not something I've given much thought to, but it does kind of make sense.
Yeah, and like he refers to these geographical areas as like talent hotbeds, and they're just places that explode with skill. And so he just kind of like interviews a bunch of not only like coaches and teachers or students, he also interviews psychologists and people who study the brain and how humans learn. And then he kind of breaks down the process of acquiring new skills. So the book itself is broken down into three main sections: deep practice, ignition, and master coaching. And my purpose for kind of like talking about this is to kind of eliminate that stigma that comes with the word talent. Because when you say like, oh, that person's so talented, I feel like it comes with a lot of preconceived notions about inborn potential, as well as undertones regarding age, especially in like young people, like prodigies, and like, oh, she's so talented. Like, you don't, when you say talent, you don't think of the time that is spent. Usually you think of the final product, the thing that everyone else sees. So I kind of want to help steer people into avoiding using the word talent and saying skillful instead. Because I think when you say, oh, that person is a talented musician versus a skillful musician, I think it helps to kind of like bring into light the process that goes into getting that talent, as opposed to just being born with it.
To your point, you're kind of saying that, talent kind of has that connotation of being born naturally gifted, or coming into some sort of amount of luck that makes them, special in some way. But your point is that there's a lot of hard work that goes into this instead. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah. Yes. And then I also think that if you refer to a talent as a skill instead, it empowers other people to pursue that as well. Because like if you say, oh, they're talented, that means like, oh, well, I wasn't born with that talent, therefore I could never, So let's just dive into it, and I'll talk about kind of the science behind learning and then how we can apply that into our own lives, not just in things that we consider to be the stereotypical talents, like learning a musical instrument or playing a sport. So one of the big things that Daniel Coyle talks about is the process of myelinization. So you've heard the saying, I'm sure, 10,000 hours, if you put 10,000 hours into something, you'll come out a master. That's kind of true, but mostly it's not, because the other phrase, practice makes perfect, that's not entirely true. It's perfect practice makes perfect. And so he kind of opens up the book talking about how a girl is recorded in a practice session, and a lot of psychologists and learning scientists have studied this particular MP3 of this girl practicing. And he calls it the recording of a girl who did a month's worth of practice in 6 minutes. And basically what it boils down to is the amount of focus and error detection that she makes throughout this practice session.
So essentially, if you just apply yourself really hard at like actually good skills that make for good practice, you can be very efficient with the time, and it doesn't just take 10,000 hours to kind of sloppily plod away at it. You can get it done in a shorter amount of time by just paying attention and practicing.
Yes, exactly. And he kind of uses this as an opener to myelinization. So our brains made up of neurons, right? So we've got all of these. You've got the input, which is like the thought to do something, and it fires an electrical signal through your brain, and it goes through the neuron, and then the output is some sort of action, right? So you think, I'm going to swing this bat, goes through your brain, and then you swing the bat, right? Myelin is an important part of the physical structure of the neural cell. So it is essentially a neural insulator. And he says, quote, Every human skill is created by chains of nerve fibers carrying a tiny electrical impulse, basically a signal traveling through a circuit, and myelin, it has its vital role to wrap those nerve fibers the same way that rubber insulation wraps a copper wire, making the signal stronger and faster by preventing the electrical impulses from leaking out. And when we practice, our myelin responds by wrapping layers of insulation around that neural circuit, each new layer adding a bit more skill and speed. The thicker myelin gets, the better it insulates, and the faster and more accurate our movements and thoughts become. So the big thing about myelin and skill acquisition and talent is that every brain has it, every age has it, unless you have some sort of disease. And the more of it that you have, the faster that neural impulse will fire. So someone who is learning to play an instrument, a master versus a novice will have similar circuitry, but the master will have better insulation, so the electrical impulses fire faster and more accurately. So basically, practice is great in that every time that neuron is fired, it wraps another layer of that myelin around that neuron, so the next time it goes to fire again, it's faster by just a little bit.
So this is kind of like muscle growth then, because
yes,
when you work out, it tears those muscle fibers and then they reassemble in a direction that's more conducive to that kind of strain for the next time. And this is similar to that. It strengthens those pathways for the next rep.
Exactly. And, when you talk about muscle memory, that is essentially an efficient circuit, an efficient neural pathway. And the goal of skill acquisition, especially for, people who have to think really, really quickly and have almost like impulsive reactions to things, the goal is towards automaticity. When our brain has myelinated a pathway so much that it is no longer a conscious effort and it feels unconscious, like an instinct. So he goes on to say that the process of myelination and learning something creates a powerfully convincing illusion that a skill once gained feels utterly natural, as if it's something we've always possessed. At least that's the final goal if you are trying to learn a skill to the point of mastery. But that can happen with anything. So like as a kind of a reference to my own personal life, I remember this one time I was working at Old Navy, and there were some things that we had to say at every transaction. So like, would you like to sign up for an Old Navy card or something like that? And it got to the point where I would say that to a customer, they would say, no, thank you. I would finish wrapping up their clothes or whatever, and then I would say it again, because like some sort of movement that I did triggered and would you like to sign up for? And I'd be like, I already said that, but like I wouldn't even have to think about it before the words even left my mouth.
Oh, interesting.
Because I had done it so much and reinforced that circuit so much that it became like instant in terms of like input, I made this particular movement towards a bag, and then output, me saying the phrase, would you like to sign up for an Old Navy card?
I had this happen, something pretty similar to what you're describing, when I used to work at Caribou Coffee, and the greeting on the drive-thru was always, I don't even remember anymore. Thanks for stopping by Caribou Coffee. What can I get you today? Something like that. And then I went to work at a car rental place, and obviously the greeting was different. It's like, hi, how are you? Kind of more general like that. But there was a time, like a year and a half into working at the car rental place, I hadn't said this phrase in a year and a half. And someone came up and I just said, thanks for choosing Caribou Coffee. What can I get you today? It's like, where did that come from? And as another example too, like at work now, or actually like I'll be calling at work. I make a lot of phone calls, leave a lot of voicemails, and I always leave our phone number as the callback number on those. And I've had it now where I'll like call a doctor's office, and I'll say give me a call back at yada yada yada, and I'm like, wait, that's my work number. Don't call there. Call my cell. So yeah, that those habits can really ingrain themselves strongly.
And that brings me actually to my next point, that the reason that bad habits are so hard to break is that myelin, once it has wrapped a neural pathway, it does not decay. It does not go away unless you have like some sort of disease that breaks down tissue.
Multiple sclerosis.
And so, yeah. So the only way to break a bad habit is to create other neural pathways that are wrapped more than the other habit. So like ending the phone call with, and thank you for calling Caribou Coffee or whatever. The only way you can break that habit is by consciously, not saying that. And then it gets to a point where the myelin has wrapped that other conscious thought or action of not saying that more than it has the old habit, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So, and then that also brings us to like wisdom. Like, why do teenagers make bad decisions? Because like technically, most teenagers, by the time they're older, they've kind of developed a sense of like, I should do this and I shouldn't do this. However, there's like that sense of impulse that teenagers have. And we're finding that like in teenagers, the whole circuit is there, but it's not insulated as strongly as like someone who is older and wiser. Because the circuit, although capable, is not instantly available to alter impulsive behavior, and it has to be a conscious thought. Teens understand like, right and wrong, but it can take them time to figure it out. Whereas someone who is older and has had more life experience, perceived as wisdom, those circuits are fully insulated and instantly available to them, meaning they can do complicated processing on many levels, which is what we would consider wisdom. So what does this mean for practicing and developing a skill? So when people practice effectively, Daniel Coyle says that we can basically describe practice as a willpower thing or a concentration thing or a focus thing. But the key to effective practice and mastery is seeking out difficulty, or seeking out the areas in which someone has a hard time with a particular skill. So like, let's say I'm playing a scale like on an instrument. Instead of playing like, let's say I'm really good at the C scale, but I'm really bad at the D scale. Me just playing the D scale over and over and over and over again, sure, it'll work to a certain degree. But let's say I can play the first 3 notes fine, I get to the 4th note, it's bad. And then I'm like, but I'm just really, really good at the first 3 notes, kind of skip over the 4th note and then like continue up the scale, kind of fumbling. Instead, it would be better to slow down, identify the areas of issue, and then make sure that you smooth over that area with difficulty to the point where it's more smooth. That was a lot of words. But basically, fully operating at the edge of your ability, identifying the areas that you are having mistakes, and then repetitively getting to the point and incorporating it into the areas that you are comfortable. So deep practice is where my teacher used to say this to me: 80% comfort, 20, and then seeking out the 20% that's really difficult, and then trying to get that 20% into the 80%. Deep practice, as Daniel Coyle says, is built on a paradox where struggling in certain targeted ways operating at the edges of your ability where you make mistakes makes you smarter, and experiences where you're focused and forced to slow down, make errors, and correct them end up making you swift and graceful without you even realizing it. So let's say you're studying for a test. There are two ways that you can go about it, essentially. You can review like the textbook, just go through it and like flip through everything, or you can do flashcards where you are constantly testing yourself and there's a little bit of struggle incorporated. And when the brain experiences that bit of struggle where it has to work a little bit harder to pull out information, that's where deep practice or significant learning happens. And in the same way, when you're applying a new skill, when you have to focus really, really hard about the thing that is tripping you up or causing a little bit of difficulty, then that's where the deep learning happens.
It's amazing how powerful learning with flashcards is. I've always been absolutely terrible with memory items. A lot of going through pilot school involves memorization of certain requirements, regulations and stuff. And there's a lot more to it than just memorization, but that portion that wrote was so challenging for me, and flashcards were the only thing that seemed to make a difference there. And I think it is because you do experience that challenge and that need to push through that 20% that's really challenging. And flashcards are a great kind of immediate feedback way to hone those skills.
Yeah. And let's say I have a hard time with names, and whenever I'm learning a person's name, I'm going to remember the instance where I forgot their name, called them the wrong name, and they correct me, more than if I were to be like, what's your name again? Oh, okay. What's your name again? Oh, okay. If I have to really think about what their name is, I'm going to remember it more long term than if I continue to ask them, oh, I'm sorry, what's your name? Or if I'm like looking at their name tag, So to finish off kind of this section about like deep practice, a summary of like how to practice effectively, whether it be in music or in sports, or even just like learning new material. There are 3 rules. So rule 1, practice in chunks. First, absorb the whole thing so you get an idea of the end goal, the desired goal in mind, and then separate things into digestible chunks. Slow it down, and the purpose of slowing things down is to increase error detection and taking care that each detail is carefully habituated, even to the point of it can be like painfully slow, but making sure that each error has been detected, so that over time you can be like, okay, I fixed this error, I can move on to the next thing, and I can bring it up to speed. Then rule 2, repetition, like I said, and then rule 3, learn to feel it, and learn to feel for that sweet spot of discomfort in your practice and seek out those areas where you struggle so that you can focus on it and have it strategically fixed, rather than being like, oh, if I do it over and over again, I'll eventually get it. And so not only is it a more effective use of your time, but it is also quality over quantity, And so when you do eventually have that skill learned, it's learned the right way so that you don't have to go back and myelinate a different skill because the other one has been myelinated so much and it becomes less of a task of unlearning something. And then it's interesting because Daniel Coyle has spoken with professors of psychology, like Barry Zimmerman, for instance, did a study with Anastasia Kitsantas from George Mason University, and they were able to predict skill level of athletes and ballerinas. I guess ballerinas are athletes. They were able to very, very accurately predict their skill level by how they described how they practiced. And every time it was someone of a high skill level, they described their practice in this exact way. slowing it down, taking it in chunks, and then seeking out the areas that need fixing and focusing on those areas almost exclusively.
That's interesting. That kind of lines up with, I don't know if you've read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers.
Nope, I have not.
I highly recommend that as a read. But basically, so Outliers in his case was talking about exceptional people, which a lot of times in a lot of contexts means professional athletes. And it's amazing how coincidental some traits are that happen to have like a 90% correlation. So like, for instance, hockey players, like professional hockey players, like 3/4 of them were born in the first 3 months of the year. And that's because in Canada, the way that they, might have been specifically Canadian hockey players, in Canada, the way they do like age groups in hockey is based on the calendar year that you're born. And so if you were born in January, February, or March, you have, another 6 months as compared to someone born in August. And when you're 23 years old, that's not a big difference. But when you are, they start these programs at 8 or 9 or 10 years old, that extra half a year is actually pretty significant. And that's where this correlation developed out of. But it's amazing how powerful that, basically that coincidental trait is in terms of that. And so there's these really interesting correlations and factors that go into that. And just repetition and that higher level of being able to train and practice well, I think goes a long way.
And then in seeking out the places of error or things that need to be fixed, they are also developing a stronger sense of the kind of technical background required for mastery. So they're not only learning how to do this particular thing, but they are teaching themselves for future them how to instinctually combat those errors.
If I may interrupt you, we've got a question in chat. We've got a stranger named Davey Nelly, who's a room over from you. He's asking how an athlete slows things down in chunks to do practice. So, in a lot of sports, it is one of those things where you really have to do it at full speed, but maybe you have an example that can blow me away here.
Yes, actually. This book is fantastic. First, I'm just going to say, if you are curious about the case studies, it's a very quick read and it is wonderful. So he does talk a lot about athletes and how they trained and how that relates to skill acquisition and error detection. So he talks a lot about like the Brazilian soccer players, and how a lot of these athletes spent a lot of their early life playing futsal. Now, that's not the same as soccer, but there were certain skills that forced them to not only work on their hand-eye coordination, but also to, because futsal is played in such a contained area, it was like a, like a cubicle full of opportunities to detect errors and to react to things. So in this case, error isn't necessarily a technical your head has to be tilted in a certain way or whatever. But in this way, it's identification and seeing reaction times, if that makes sense. Actually, I can talk more about this in the next section, in the third section. So I'll come back to this, but master coaches has a lot to do with professional athletes and how they are able to work with them. So the second big section of this particular book, The Talent Code, talks about ignition. And it's, long story short, in order to become very skillful at something, not only do you need to practice well, but you need to actually want to practice, right? It's the spark of motivation, and these can arise from a variety of things, such as like primal cues, like you're gonna die if you don't do this thing. Records to be broken, things that are like, oh, well, so and so just broke the record for fastest swim, you know, like Michael Phelps, you know, and like he kept breaking his own records. In the same way, you can seek out those kind of like mile markers as a way to motivate yourself. You've got mentors who can give you like the motivation and desire to do something. And then even environmental regularization of a particular goal to the point where it seems natural that your actions should reflect your end goal. So besides deep practice and, you know, making sure that you've got all the nitpicky things right, ignition and the desire to pursue greatness in quotes, is just as important. So next and final section is master coaches. So this is in many cases the source of the talent hotbeds that we were kind of talking about, these geographical areas. And these are people who are able to naturally streamline myelinization and understand how skill is acquired with a vast set of underlying knowledge, sometimes to the point of intuition, that allows them the ability to quickly identify, diagnose, and provide short corrective feedback to eliminate errors. So master coaches give frequent feedback, don't allow the student to repeat mistakes, and ensure that lessons, practice, coaching, whatever, is geared towards deep practice. So phrases that Daniel Coyle noticed being used a lot by master coaches or teachers was this, not that, here, not there, pointing out errors and immediately guiding the correct way. So like if you've got a coach who's teaching someone how to do free throws, don't use your whole arm. Think more about your wrist. Okay, do it. Instead of being like, great job, now blah, 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 blah. And then they get straight to the point.
Or on the other end of that too, waiting until after practice to say, oh, you were using your whole arm the whole time. You should have been using
exactly.
your wrist.
They say like, stop, do this instead. They immediately interrupt the incorrect behavior and then say, do this instead. So like my voice teacher would always be like, what's the use in giving directions at a 4-way stop and saying, don't go left? Okay, great. Like what do I do now? Say, go straight. You know, giving them not only this is what you're doing wrong, but instead do this. So you'll get master coaches or teachers who say, oh, rather than thinking about I don't know, I'm trying to think of a very specific instance. But like I guess like with the sports thing.
You are the expert on sports.
Oh yes, of course. I mean like a musical example. An example of bad teaching would be don't use your tongue. Okay. Well then what am I supposed to do? Like a better instruction would be right now you are kind of grabbing at the base of your tongue. So instead think of more towards the vowel E, because it sounds like you're thinking more the vowel oo. You know, something that's like, you're doing this, try this instead. Master coaches are also people who provide like an ignition for students. And so master coaches are also can also be people who aren't necessarily the most skilled in their field, but can provide students with the desire to pursue technical perfection. So the 4 virtues of master coaches, as he lists in his book, would be a matrix, or a vast knowledge, or vast ocean of knowledge with many options in terms of how to connect with the student. perceptiveness and an ability to find and detect errors, the GPS reflex, which is go this way, not that way, and then a theatrical honesty, a way to give feedback that doesn't destroy the students or, you know, athletes or whatever desire to pursue being better.
If it's constant criticism, that can be demoralizing. Whereas if you kind of guide that tunnel, that way to greatness, that'll motivate someone a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. So with all of the information that I have kind of like tossed at you, here are the big takeaways. Understanding what myelin means for your brain and how learning happens and how you can apply that to your practice. So being aware of deep practice and deliberate practice and how that is key to developing a talent or a skill. So 1,000 hours of cruddy practice equals cruddy skill. And then what does this mean for life in general? So you can apply the science of skill acquisition to anything. So I like to use this example because this book really kind of like opened my eyes to like how I can take control of my own learning and not just my music practice. So like, yes, I want my practice to be focused and goal oriented, but I also suffered intensely from social anxiety. And this book kind of made me think more cerebrally about how to approach that. And I kind of like thought of it as, well, my current state of mind is that I see a person and my immediate desire is to go and run and hide because I was afraid of, I don't know, like saying something stupid. And I still am to this day, but like I've kind of like overcome the desire to like flee. But really like what it is just like knowing that, okay, so it seems that the physical structure of my brain and the neural circuits that are firing right now have been very, very myelinated. So the key to undoing that myelination is to develop another neural pathway that has been myelinated more strongly. So the way I kind of went about it was that I would kind of be like, okay, take it in chunks. I'm going to not look at the ground when I'm walking somewhere in public so that I can associate the thought of seeing people with normalcy. Then once that became normal and the more habituated way of walking, then I thought, okay, well, I will smile at a stranger as I walk past them. Easy, another chunk, make that as habituated as possible, and then move on to the next thing. Eventually, I got to the point where I'd be like, okay, my goal is to compliment someone on what they're wearing at least once today. And this is when I was going to school a lot and I was seeing a lot of people. But like, I mean, today I've been sitting a lot at my desk or in a house, not with other people. But I would try and do that at least once a day to the point where it kind of became natural. And although I do kind of like struggle with like second guessing myself, I kind of have gotten rid of that like desire to run and hide kind of social anxiety. But like, because I was able to cognitively think about, well, instead of like the wishy-washy, oh, I wish I was a more outgoing person, I realized that with myelinization and conscious thought and desire to acquire the skill of not being afraid in public, I'm physically changing the structure of my brain to the point where I no longer feel that physical fear of seeing other people.
I find it really interesting that you're describing, social anxiety as something you can train yourself out of, rather than like a mental health problem that needs to be treated per se.
Well, here's the thing.
I think functionally it is pretty similar, but sorry.
Yeah, and like that's not to say I'm trying to devalue therapy or anything like that, because I mean, I love therapy, has been so helpful for me. But like one thing that I love therapy for is that, especially talk therapy, what I mostly have experience doing or going to people for, is a lot of it is like, okay, altering your perception and trying to think of other ways to cope with a physical or immediate emotional reaction to something. And what all of that is in your brain. And so the way I like to approach problem solving tends to be a more cerebral or objective way. And so I'm thinking, well, the input is seeing people and the output is anxiety. How can I rewire my brain in a cognitive way so that I can think of anxiety for myself as a bad habit that I can train out of myself? That's something that worked for me personally, because I already approach problem solving that way, as like a list of things to like do, so I can give myself something else to focus on rather than my anxiety. And I like to think of most of problems that aren't just like my body, but like things that, like, when I get really in my head and I can tell I'm really in my head, those are things that I can tell my brain has been habituated to think a certain way. So like during the time when I was really like struggling with social anxiety, I tried really hard to habituate, oh, I'm acknowledging that this particular situation is giving me anxious feelings. Now, what way can I stop that feeling, kind of like that, an error detection almost, and being like, oh, I'm noticing that you're doing that. How about we think about something else instead? And think about, oh, I like what that person is wearing, rather than, oh, that person probably thinks I'm an idiot.
So you're recognizing the undesired behavior and coming up with a solution, a better way to react on the spot.
Yes. And that it's in itself took practice, but like going out in public more often helped, not only like provided me with like exposure to like social situations, but it also provides more opportunities for you to like opportunistically recognize the situations in which I'm uncomfortable, and then strategically find ways to go around that or to approach it, especially as someone who wants to pursue a musical career where connecting with people is kind of the job.
Yeah.
And so it was something that I couldn't just be like, oh, well, I can deal with it by not putting myself in those situations. Well, if I want to be successful in a career field that involves other people, which is most of the time, then I need to find out ways to cope with it, or to change my thinking in a way that I embrace those areas of struggle, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that was like a long personal account of how this book kind of like made me think more about skill acquisition, not just in terms of talent, but like in terms of like every aspect of my life, and how I can consciously go about developing everyday skills that can like improve my general well-being. But yeah. Another great resource that I should probably touch up on is The Bulletproof Musician by Noah Kageyama, and it's a blog, so thebulletproofmusician.com, and he kind of talks about treating performance and practice as two different skills, because what he does, he's a sports psychologist who works with musicians, but sports psychologists essentially go into like the psychology of practice versus performing. So like going to playing in a game or performing in a concert, performance anxiety and combating that for both musicians and athletes is the same, and how to treat those two things, which is practice and performance, as two separate skills that you develop, and how to go about kind of approaching every aspect of being a performer or an athlete as like an objective, like goal, task oriented thing. But yeah, so I would encourage you to check that out if you are interested. And The Talent Code by Daniel Coyle is fantastic. And I kind of like gleaned over a lot of the details and a lot of the case studies, but I highly recommend reading it. And it kind of changed my life in terms of like how I approach problems in general. But yeah, what do you think about skill acquisition, both in chat and Doug, if you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do want to borrow that book from you next time I see you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. A book I read recently is called Thanks for the Feedback. And a lot of the same stuff that you're describing there matches up with the things that are said in there. In terms of, Thanks for the Feedback obviously is about feedback. So that kind of ties in, in terms of getting that timely and specific feedback about something you can do better. I like that from that standpoint. Looks like this stranger Davey Nelly in chat again is saying practice versus performance definitely hits. I'm a way worse practicer, but getting better.
Yeah, those are definitely two very separate skills. But that is all I have to say for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to our Talky Taffy premiere episode.
Yeah, this has been fun.
Yeah, where we just like to find topics that really interest us and kind of bring them to the forefront, talk about it a little bit.
Nibble on them.
Yeah. So one thing that we would like to regularly incorporate into our podcasts is a charity call. And we would like to kind of encourage you, if you are able, to donate to different charities. And we have some that we like to highlight. So Doug, kind of talk us through what our current charity is.
Yeah, so I think the charity that we'll go with for probably the first quarter of 2021 here is a charity called Carbon 180. This is actually something that you brought up as a viable charity that I think does amazing work. But to me, the pandemic right now is probably the most immediate and important threat in the world. But after that, the longer term and much more severe threat to human society is climate change, as I see it. And so Carbon 180 is focused on removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, contributing toward that cause of cooling down the earth. It's definitely something that I am very passionate about, and we started a GoFundMe. The link is in chat there. We'll put it in the description for the show as well. But it's, hopefully something where we can actually make a difference and inform policymakers and contribute to causes who are trying to make the earth more sustainable and renewable.
Yeah. So donate if you can. Also, we have an email. So if you have any ideas or feedback that you would like to give us, feel free to email us at talkytaffy@gmail.com. We also have a Discord. So feel free to join that. Follow our Twitch. We have Twitter and a YouTube channel coming up soon, and it's just at Talky Taffy, the name of our podcast here. You can watch us live here on Twitch at 5:30 Central Time every other week. We'll post a schedule somewhere. And yeah, thank you so much for tuning in. We know that the world can be scary, and we really hope that you'll kind of like join us every once in a while to kind of take your mind off of the scary things, enjoy the time you have, And yeah. Anything else to say, Doug?
Take care of yourselves. We love you as much as we love anyone else. So, yeah. If you're here, you're pretty cool.
Yeah. Alrighty.
Awesome.
So, thanks for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day, rest of the week, and we'll see you at the next podcast.
We'll see you in a fortnight. Boom.
Fortnight, yeah.
Cool.
All
Thanks,
right.
everyone. Bye.
Okay. Bye.